I had a interesting discussion with the CEO of a small energy company recently that is just sort of at the nascent stage of confronting and interacting with shareholders on environmental issues and providing disclosures and things of that nature. And the conversation evolved to, we were talking about specific shareholders, and the reality is, and this is true of most companies, that a lot of the push on these disclosures and these standards are coming from passive investors, the large index funds, Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street, and others. And the expression on the CEO's face was very telling, because he was like, well, those are index funds, right? I mean, those aren't really the shareholders that I'm focused on. And I had to explain that, like it or not, maybe you're not happy about having so many shares held by passive investors, but that's the reality, and they're incredibly influential, and they now care about these things, and you can't just ignore them. But I wonder, again, from your perspective, do you see a difference between a focus on, say, environmental or social issues coming from a passive investor that I would call more of a risk manager, as opposed to an active money manager that is more of a, what I would call an investor making buy and sell decisions? Like, do you see a distinction there?
I think I see it slightly differently. So yes, there is a distinction, but I view it in a kind of different framework. So the active investors are also often there for a shorter period of time, where the passive investors are perpetual investors. They know that they're going to be shareholders of this company literally forever, as long as it's in whatever index that they're tracking. And for the really big ones, because of the breadth of all of the investment styles they have, they're going to be shareholders in thousands of companies for forever. So I think it's that time horizon that is the principal difference, which leads to another difference, which is among the active shareholders. They seem to be more concerned often about governance issues. Like, they were the ones really pushing for stock option expensing 15 or 20 years ago. They're the ones who will push for regime change, or for governance changes that are seem pretty arcane to other people, about bylaws or special meetings or whatever. And the ESG movement is being led by the perpetual shareholders, who care that the company is creating value decades hence. And I remember from early in my CEO tenure, a shareholder proposal being put forth by a group of nuns, and their issue was that they wanted us to change, by way of a shareholder proposal, was to stop disposing of PVC plastic in incinerators. And of course, hospitals generate quite a lot of medical waste, much of which is PVC plastic. And it seemed like an incredibly obscure issue, and it was coming from a group that obviously did not own material amounts of stock. But upon looking into it and understanding the issue more, we determined that actually burning these things in an incinerator did release chemicals that could cause cancer, and the cost of disposing of them in a different way was really not materially different. It's just habit, and practices within the waste management industry that were doing this. So we changed it. So I think that a lot of companies will look at these ESG initiatives, or even ones like the PVC pipe experience that I had, a long time ago, and think, okay, this is kind of a waste of time. It's a nuisance. Why are these people bothering me? But over time, this makes for a better and more sustainable enterprise. And I think that the perpetual shareholders are recognizing that if they don't do something about these issues like diversity and climate change, that nobody will. And exerting influence on companies by way of proxy voting is one of the few ways that again, shareholders having special rights beyond, say, consumers or employees, can exercise that type of influence.
It's a great story, and one thing I've seen from over the years for me is a real change in the way companies and shareholders, including proponents of referendums, interact. It was antagonistic a couple decades ago. The shareholders felt the only way they could get the attention of a company was to submit a proposal. So they'd submit the proposal first, then they'd have the conversation, and depending on how that went, maybe they would withdraw the proposal. But now, with a couple of rare exceptions, but for the most part, those conversations are now more ongoing, and the proposal now comes at the end of a conversation if something cannot be resolved. And I view that as a good thing, because it used to be that companies would go right into sort of bunker mentality, put up their walls, resist, and the shareholders would get overly agitated and aggressive, and it just was not a healthy climate to generate constructive solutions.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that in those days, it was normal for the company's legal department to try to knock the proposal out, with the SEC before the CEO even learned that it existed.
Right. Yeah, and
it's a much more collaborative process now. I agree with you, and I think it's a healthier way of engaging in governance for companies.